What happens when a billionaire witnesses a struggling waitress's selfless gesture? A story you won't believe. The soft glow of the neon sign buzzed outside Sam's Diner, a small roadside eatery in rural Kansas. It wasn't fancy or particularly popular, but it was one of those places where regulars came for strong coffee and a warm smile. Tonight, however, the usual chatter was absent, replaced by the occasional scrape of a fork against a plate. The winter wind howled against the windows, making even the flicker of the diner's fluorescent lights feel oddly comforting. Inside, Mia, a waitress in her mid-30s, moved between tables with practiced ease. Her life had been a series of long shifts and even longer nights, but she wasn't one to complain. She had bills to pay and a 10-year-old daughter, Lily, waiting at home. Every tip mattered, and every plate she carried reminded her of why she worked so hard. The door jingled as it opened, letting in a brief gust of icy air. Mia barely glanced up. It was probably just another trucker stopping in for a quick bite. She was too busy clearing a booth near the window, wiping away the crumbs and grease left by a family that had just left. But as she glanced outside, her hand paused mid-swipe. A boy stood near the edge of the parking lot, barely illuminated by the diner's lights. He couldn't have been older than 10 or 11, his frame small and frail. His jacket, several sizes too large, was torn at the seams, and his sneakers looked as though they'd walked more miles than they should have. He hugged himself against the biting cold, his gaze fixed on the diners inside. Mia's chest tightened. He wasn't begging or making a scene, just standing there, his expression a mix of longing and weariness. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to him. Who was he? Where were his parents? And why was he out here alone on such a brutal night? A voice snapped her out of her thoughts. "Refill on coffee, hun." It was Mr. Peterson, one of the regulars. Mia quickly grabbed the coffee pot and filled his mug, offering a distracted smile. But as the night went on, her eyes kept wandering back to the boy. He hadn't moved, though his arms were now crossed tightly, his shoulders trembling with the cold. Every instinct told her to stay out of it. She couldn't afford to get involved. She barely made enough to support her own family. Still, something about the boy pulled at her. Maybe it was his small frame, reminiscent of Lily when she was younger, or the look in his eyes that seemed to speak of a pain far beyond his years. But Mia couldn't shake the feeling that ignoring him would haunt her long after the diner lights had dimmed. Mia tried to busy herself with work, but the boy's image lingered in her mind. Each time she glanced out the window, he was still there, his thin frame illuminated by the flicker of the diner's neon sign. The customers around her seemed oblivious, caught up in their own conversations and meals. She wondered if anyone else had noticed him, or cared enough to. As she cleared another table, her co-worker Jenny leaned over. "You okay? You've been staring out the window all night." Mia hesitated. "There's a boy out there," she whispered, nodding toward the window. "I think he's homeless." Jenny followed her gaze but quickly shrugged. "Probably. We get a few like that sometimes. They don't usually cause trouble." Mia frowned. "But it's freezing out there. He looks like he hasn't eaten in days." Jenny sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can you do? It's not like we're running a charity. If he comes in, fine. But you can't save everyone, Mia." Jenny's words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they felt true. Mia had always been the type to help others, even when it stretched her thin. She'd picked up extra shifts for co-workers, lent money she didn't have, and donated clothes that Lily had outgrown. But this felt different. This wasn't just someone down on their luck. This was a child, alone and vulnerable. The diner door jingled again, and for a moment Mia thought the boy might walk in. But it was just another couple seeking refuge from the cold. She couldn't wait any longer. Grabbing a clean plate, Mia made her way to the kitchen. She scooped a generous serving of the day's special, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans, and added a warm roll on the side. She hesitated for a moment, knowing this wasn't exactly by the book. Food waste was a strict no-go at the diner, and giving away meals for free wasn't encouraged. But she couldn't ignore the ache in her chest. As she carried the plate to the counter, her boss, Ron, caught her eye. "What's that for?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Mia thought fast. "Customer didn't like their order," she lied smoothly. "I'm just going to toss it out." Ron grunted, more interested in his crossword puzzle than her explanation. She exhaled in relief and headed toward the door. The cold hit her instantly, cutting through her thin uniform. The boy turned toward her, startled as the door creaked open. His wide eyes darted from the plate in her hands to her face, unsure whether to approach. "Hey, sweetheart," Mia said softly, crouching down to his level. "You look hungry. This is for you." The boy hesitated, his small hands clenched tightly against his sides. "It's okay," she reassured him. "You don't have to say anything. Just take it." Finally, he reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the warm plate. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, his eyes filled with tears, and he gave her a small nod of gratitude. Mia's throat tightened, and she forced herself to smile. "You can eat it here," she offered. "Inside, where it's warm." The boy shook his head quickly, clutching the plate to his chest as though it might disappear. He stepped back toward the shadows, his thin frame fading into the darkness. Mia wanted to follow, to ask him where he was staying if he needed more help. But she stopped herself. Pushing him might scare him off completely. As she watched him disappear into the night, a strange mix of emotions washed over her, sadness, relief, and a deep sense of helplessness. She wished she could do more, but for now at least he wouldn't go to bed hungry. But Mia didn't notice the man sitting in the far corner of the diner, his sharp eyes following every move she made. He had seen everything. Mia returned inside, the warmth of the diner a sharp contrast to the biting cold she'd just stepped out of. She shook off the chill as she grabbed a rag to clean another table. The moment with the boy replayed in her mind. His hesitant movements, the way he clutched the plate like a lifeline. It stayed with her, heavier than she expected. She wished she could have done more, but at least she'd given him a little comfort on such a harsh night. The diner began to settle as the dinner rush faded. A few regulars lingered at their usual spots, nursing coffee or picking at slices of pie. Mia's routine took over, her hands moving automatically as she wiped tables, refilled condiments, and cleared plates. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. From the corner of the diner, a man sat alone, his posture relaxed yet composed. He was dressed simply, a dark coat, pressed shirt, and neatly polished shoes. His presence was understated, almost deliberately so. But what stood out were his eyes, sharp, observant, and unwavering. He had been in the diner for over an hour, speaking to no one, but his gaze had followed Mia more than once. She had noticed him earlier, thinking he might be one of those passing-through types. The diner often attracted travelers, truckers, or the occasional salesman. But there was something about him. He didn't seem to fit into any of those categories. Still, Mia didn't have time to dwell on it. Her shift wasn't over, and the tips weren't going to earn themselves. As she made her rounds, the man waved her over. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though he didn't want to draw too much attention. "Can I get you something else?" Mia asked, pen poised over her notepad. He looked up at her, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm fine, thank you. I just wanted to say, what you did out there, it was a beautiful thing." Mia froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't realized anyone had seen her take the plate outside. "Oh," she said awkwardly. "It wasn't a big deal." The man tilted his head, his expression softening. "Not everyone would do what you did. Most people would look the other way. But you didn't. Mia shrugged, brushing off the compliment. He's just a kid. He looked like he needed a meal. That's all. That's not all, the man said quietly. You saw someone who needed help and gave what you could, even though I'm guessing you don't have much to spare. Mia wasn't sure how to respond. His words felt oddly personal, as though he saw straight through her. She shifted uncomfortably, forcing a smile. Well, I should get back to work. Let me know if you need anything else. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. What's your name? She hesitated for a moment before answering. Mia. Thank you, Mia, he said, his tone sincere. You're a rare kind of person. The words stayed with her as she moved through the rest of her shift. Something about the man's presence was both comforting and unsettling. He seemed too composed, too observant, as if he was studying her, not in a predatory way, but in a way that felt significant. She tried to shake it off, chalking it up to her own overactive imagination. As the night wore on, the man eventually paid his bill, leaving a generous tip. He didn't say another word to her, simply offering a nod of acknowledgement as he walked out into the night. Mia watched him go, her curiosity piqued. Who was he? And why had he been so moved by such a small gesture? When she went to collect his payment, she found an envelope tucked beneath his plate. Inside was a note, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Kindness is a rare gift in this world. You gave without expecting anything in return. That is the kind of spirit that changes lives. Don't lose it. Mia read the note twice, her heart pounding. It wasn't signed, and there was no way to tell where it had come from. But as she folded it carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket, she couldn't help but feel that her small act of kindness had set something much larger in motion. But Mia had no idea just how true that was, or how profoundly her life was about to change. As the man stepped into the frigid night, he glanced back at the diner, its warm glow spilling into the darkness. His name was Victor Hayes, though few people outside his circle would have recognized him. He was a self-made billionaire, the kind who had climbed from nothing to unimaginable wealth through grit and vision. His story was one of hardship, resilience, and an unwavering belief in giving back to those who reminded him of where he'd come from. Tonight, Victor hadn't planned to stop at Sam's Diner. He was passing through town after a meeting with a regional charity organization, intending to drive straight to his next destination. But the neon lights had caught his eye, and something compelled him to stop, not for the food, but for the simplicity of it all. Sometimes, even a man who could afford the world craved the quiet hum of everyday life. Sitting in the corner booth, he had observed everything. The waitress moving between tables with practiced ease, the way she offered each customer a genuine smile despite the exhaustion etched on her face. And then, of course, the moment she noticed the boy. Victor had seen that look before, the same one he had carried as a child growing up in the foster system, cold and hungry, relying on the kindness of strangers to survive. He had watched as Mia prepared the plate of food, her movements deliberate but unassuming. She hadn't looked for anyone's approval, hadn't hesitated despite the risk of getting into trouble. It wasn't an act for show, it was pure, unfiltered humanity. It stirred something in him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He had met countless people in his life, CEOs, politicians and celebrities, but few had impressed him as much as this tired waitress who had given what little she had to help a boy she didn't even know. Victor's driver pulled the sleek black car around, but he waved him off for a moment, needing time to think. The cold bit at his face as he stood there, his mind racing. He had spent his life building wealth to create opportunities for others, but tonight had reminded him of a truth he often overlooked. Sometimes, the smallest gestures held the greatest power. As he got into the car, an idea began to form. He had the resources to change lives on a grand scale, but what if, just this once, he focused all that power on one person? What if he could do for Mia, and that boy, what no one had done for him, when he was in their shoes. The car pulled away from the diner, but Victor's resolve only grew stronger. He opened his laptop, typing out a series of instructions to his team. The message was simple but precise. Research the diner, the waitress, and the boy. He wanted to know everything, their stories, their struggles, and most importantly, how he could help. The following morning, his assistant, Evelyn, called him with an update. "Her name is Mia Brooks," she said, her voice steady. "Single mother, works double shifts at the diner to support her daughter, Lily. She's barely scraping by, but she has no debts and a clean record. The boy is harder to track, likely homeless, no school records or family connections in the area." Victor's jaw tightened, his determination solidifying. "I want to meet with her," he said firmly. "And I want to help her, but it has to be discreet. No cameras, no press." Evelyn hesitated. "Are you sure? This isn't your usual approach." Victor leaned back in his chair, his mind flashing to the boy's hollow eyes and the quiet dignity in Mia's actions. "I'm sure. Some stories aren't meant for headlines. This is personal." But even Victor couldn't anticipate the ripple effect his decision would have, not just on Mia and the boy, but on his own understanding of what it meant to truly give. The next day, Mia's routine carried on as usual: early morning coffee, packing Lily's lunch, and heading to the diner for her shift. She barely had time to think about the mysterious note, or the man who had left it. Life, as always, demanded her full attention. It wasn't until her break that she noticed a sleek black car pull into the diner's parking lot. The windows were tinted, and the vehicle looked entirely out of place in their small town. When the door opened, Victor Hayes stepped out, his movements purposeful yet unhurried. Mia recognized him immediately, her stomach tightening with nerves. What was he doing back here? Victor entered the diner and approached her with a warm, disarming smile. "Mia," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "Do you have a moment to talk?" Caught off guard, she glanced at her boss, who was eyeing them curiously from the kitchen. Sure," she stammered, wiping her hands on her apron. She led him to a quiet booth near the back, feeling the weight of every curious gaze in the room. Victor didn't waste time. "What you did last night was extraordinary," he said, his tone earnest. "You didn't just feed that boy, you saw him. You gave him dignity when the world had forgotten him." Mia shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't a big deal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just did what anyone would." Victor's expression softened. "That's where you're wrong. Most people wouldn't. That's why I'm here. To make sure your kindness doesn't go unnoticed." He reached into his coat and handed her a folded piece of paper. Mia hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling slightly. It was a check. She blinked, trying to process the number staring back at her. It wasn't just generous, it was life-changing. "I don't understand," she murmured, her voice shaky. "Why are you doing this?" Victor leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Because someone once did the same for me. When I was a boy, just like the one you helped, a stranger saw something in me that no one else did. They gave me a chance, a way out. I've never forgotten that. And I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I'd pay it forward." Tears welled in Mia's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Victor replied gently. "Just promise me you'll use it to build the life you and your daughter deserve." Mia nodded, overwhelmed by the gesture, but Victor wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," he said. "That boy you helped. I want to make sure he's okay too. I've already had my team locate him, and they're working on finding him a safe place to stay. I thought you might want to be involved." Her breath caught. "You found him? He's safe?" Victor nodded. "He will be, thanks to you." Over the next few weeks, Mia's life transformed in ways she never imagined. The check allowed her to leave her job at the diner and pursue her dream of opening a small bakery, something she'd always wanted but could never afford. Victor's team helped her find stable housing for the boy, who eventually reunited with a relative in a nearby town. And through it all, Victor remained a quiet but steady presence, ensuring everything went smoothly without drawing attention to himself. One evening, as Mia tucked Lily into bed, she reflected on how much had changed. It wasn't just about the money or the opportunities. It was about the reminder that kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she might never fully understand. Victor's generosity had given her more than financial stability. It had reignited her faith in the goodness of people. In the quiet of her living room, Mia picked up a journal and wrote down the day's events, a habit she'd started recently. At the top of the page, she scribbled a note to herself. Kindness is never wasted. Even the smallest act can change the world. Because that's what she'd learned. Not just from Victor, but from her own small act of compassion on a cold winter's night. If this story touched you, remember that you have the power to make a difference too. Subscribe for more stories that remind us all of the strength of kindness and humanity.